My identity was based on my salary to now being a value add to our community.
What were the takeaways that you had that you can leave our audience with?
Having those hard conversations with your customers, that let them know that we cared enough to make changes inclusive to them.
Were there any memorable roadblocks that you remember throughout the journey?
The day of the event, one person showed up. So it was like my worst nightmare happened,
Whether it's a business partner or a CEO peer group, you need to have some sort of support to come alongside of you through that process.
Am I honoring the work that my in-laws put into this business? That is good in any business situation.
In order for a legacy to happen, you have to honor the past. The past generation needs to trust in the vision of the next generation, right?
Yeah.
And so success doesn't happen until both of those come together. And you did it because you kept the ultimate goal in mind.
Diverse thinking to the podcast from a generational aspect.
Change doesn't have to be overwhelming. Once you've made change, your mind knows how to make change.
At any stage of our lives, we are unstoppable. A dynamic leader who has met change head on demonstrated how she is unstoppable in embracing change and growth. And I am so looking forward for her to share her story with us today. Hi, Deborah.
Well, thank you so much, you guys, for having me on. I appreciate you, Lori, and Michelle, and Tyler, and just being able to share our story. And I always say that God has a great sense of humor, because I always said that I hated retail and I'm not handy. And I ended up marrying into the hardware business. Yeah. And so my background is IT project management. And so I used to go into large organizations and I'd work on projects from anywhere from 6 months to 18 months, depending on the project. And after I got married, about 2 years into our marriage, my husband came to me and said that our business wasn't doing well and we needed to make some changes. And so he asked if I would come on and be their project manager at the store.
Okay.
And so I ended up praying about it, and I just really felt like God gave me a vision for what our next steps would be. So I left my 6-figure job to go make $12 an hour at our hardware store.
Wow.
Well, that's stepping into an embracing change.
Very much so. Number one, we needed to increase the business. We needed to increase the customer footprint, and we needed to increase our sales. We were a couple of years away from having to make some really critical decisions. So thankfully, my husband had some insight and brought me on a couple of years before that. And so we said, let's do a 5-year plan and see how far we get. And then after 5 years, we're going to reassess and then determine if we want to continue on with the business or if we want to sell.
When you made the change out of your corporate identity, what kind of mindsets, or how did you transition from that into finding fulfillment in something you never thought you'd want to be a part of?
Well, that's a really great question, because I realized that I love planning events. And so when we remodeled our store, so our store was kind of stuck in the 80s. And when we decided to remodel the store, we wanted to create a beautiful boutique style hardware store. Is that weird or what? So we created this high-end boutique hardware store. And one of my goals was to create a welcoming and family-centered environment. And so events really became kind of my passion. So we hosted kids events, we hosted Lefse class, we had a kids Santa shop. So we always had stuff where we were actually inviting the community to come into our space and create long-lasting memories.
Wow, that's interesting. You found this love of events, but what were some of the struggles that you had, or the doubts, and how did you push through them?
It was really a mind shift of going, my identity was based on my salary to now my identity is based on how am I being a value add to our community. And that was a really big mind shift, but it also brought me more purpose and more joy.
Yeah. Let's land on that for a minute, because I think it's so important as leaders and business owners, especially we do kind of tie our identity to our company or the role we play or how much we make. And, what was the process that you went through to change your mindset around that? And what was the result of that?
I don't know if it was necessarily so much of a process, but just continuing to show up every day, being consistent every day, having that plan in place also helped, knowing that this is what we're working toward, also knowing who we're helping and why we're there. So when
Yeah.
we remodeled our store, we had done a customer survey to just better understand what our customers thought of us. And we had to listen to some really hard things. We heard you're overpriced, your store is outdated, and you're not very welcoming. And that was really hard to hear. But then we also got to hear, we love that you're a family. We love that you're locally owned. And so what we did is we remodeled a purpose around family, being a place to gather and bringing a sense of community. So we took the things that we could change and the positive feedback that we did receive, and we turned that into an asset. And that was really, honestly, Michelle, what helped change my mindset from, well, my value is in my salary to my value is now helping my community.
What I heard you say, Deborah, was that, you really listened to your customers first. And then based on that, you kind of discovered your why. And from discovering your why, that allowed you to have the vision for what steps you needed to take. And that's so important because a lot of leaders don't do that. They set out with a product and service, and that's the product and service they deliver. They don't listen to their customers, and they don't have a deeper purpose. So then when you find yourself making $12 an hour, now all of a sudden you don't have that purpose. So talk to us a little bit more about like what went on inside of you as that was happening, and then what change did you see with your customers?
Well, as we were going through the process, I started to notice that for myself, I got more excited about the business and our vision and what we were doing. And as I was excited about it and our family became excited about it and seeing those changes, we noticed then the community was getting excited about who we were, what we were doing, and wanting to become a part of who we were and what we were offering. And I loved hearing the stories of families coming in and saying, I remember when I was little and we used the same 1 cent gumball machine, or I remember walking in and the smell of the hardware store. I remember coming in with my grandpa. And so that got me excited and giving me a sense of purpose and realizing that we were there for something more than just a transaction.
Wow.
We were part of helping create and build memories that were generational. It wasn't just a one-time thing. I mean, these were people that had grown up in our community and had memories of being in our store when it was downtown Main Street of Waconia.
Were there fears that you had to overcome?
A big fear for me was stepping out in faith for doing events, because you're putting yourself out there, you're posting and you hope that somebody's going to show up, that they're going to actually want to come. We actually had an event that we planned for women on how to fix your toilet. And we had a ton of people that was positive response. And the day of the event, one person showed up.
Oh, wow.
So it was like my worst nightmare happened, And but what we did is we turned an obstacle and we turned it around into an opportunity. That one person was from the media, and so I treated her as if I had 100 women in the store, and we gave her the same treatment, and she wrote a wonderful news article for our
Awesome.
store
Wow.
over it. And so, sometimes we have to take our obstacles and turn them into opportunities. And that was one. So not all of my events went off without a hitch. Some of them were absolute success, and then some of them weren't so much. But it was really about putting myself out there and stepping out in faith that this was the direction that we really believed we needed to go. And it did end up proving very well for us. Well, then what happened is 2020 hit. And we all know what happened in 2020. It was COVID.
Mm-hmm.
And thankfully, we had been prepared because doing our remodel, engaging with the community, when COVID hit, we were considered an essential business. And so our business tripled overnight. And
Wow.
our store then was prepared to handle all of that business. But then in July of 2020, the only other hardware store in town closed. So now we went from having COVID business and getting business from this other hardware store that closed. But because we had been prepared, we were able to handle all of that business. Of course, it was overwhelming because there weren't a lot of us, but we were able to handle that business. And then a couple of business owners approached us about purchasing our store. But what we realized going through that process is that we weren't ready. We weren't ready to sell. And also, we realized that they weren't a good fit for us. And we were looking for something, some specific vision, and that just wasn't a good fit. But what then that triggered for us was that, okay, our store is doing well. We're now the only hardware store in town. What would it look like for us to be prepared to sell?
I just am curious as to how you recognized that you weren't ready, and then what steps did you take to get ready?
What we realized how we weren't ready is that we didn't know what our inventory numbers were. We didn't know what our fixtures, we didn't know the value of our business. We didn't know the value of our fixtures. We didn't know the value of our building. Those were all things that play into when you're thinking of selling. And so we approached our hardware distributor at the time, and they sent us information to help us start kind of looking at. And so we started going through the whole store, and it took us 2 years to go through that whole process to really feel prepared that we could possibly bring our store to market and have a successful sale.
And then being a family-owned business for many, many decades, how did you ready yourself emotionally as a family for the sale?
It was a lot of work, and it was a lot of hard conversations. And I think that's something that especially family-owned businesses try to avoid are the hard conversations. But stepping into those and saying, what would it really look like if we were to sell? And my father-in-law, his idea of retiring was to work in the business until he could physically no longer work. And so because we had taken that 2 years to start preparing and having those hard conversations, people think, oh, well, you just have a hard conversation and it's over. No, it can take years. It took us 2 years of hard conversations before we were even ready to remodel the store, much less being ready to think about selling the business. And so having those hard conversations was really key for all of us, saying, do we need to go bigger? Are we ready for that? Well, what would that look like? Nope, we're not. We realized that's not the road we want to go down. But then if we were to sell, who would be our ideal buyer? And having those hard conversations. So I think a lot of times people don't realize, or maybe steer away from, because family dynamics can be hard, steering away from those hard conversations. But those are the things that actually help grow your relationship and build it stronger and make it stronger, but also help give everybody a level playing field and help give everybody a better direction on here's where I'm at. Each person gets a say, and kind of walking through that process. But like I said, it was 2 years of hard conversations.
Yeah. So Deb, the question that I had is, you talk about the importance of these hard conversations. And first off, that's good to know. But another thing is, what are some traits that you need to have when you do go into these hard conversations to make sure that it really is impactful and that you leave it not thinking that it was a bad conversation, a negative, but a, constructive?
I absolutely love that question because this was something my husband and I had to discuss before we went into having some of these hard conversations with our family was what is our ultimate goal? If we're going to sit down and have a hard conversation, what do we want to get out of this? Because the minute you start bringing stuff up, all of a sudden you start going down some other rabbit trail and emotions start flaring up and people start getting upset.
Oh.
But if you have that goal, you can bring that conversation back around to here's what our ultimate goal is and why we wanted to have this conversation. And then also checking your own motives. So for me, it was, am I honoring the work that my in-laws put into this business for 50 plus years? Honoring the past, honoring what has been done. And that honestly is good in any business situation, not downplaying or mocking or putting others down because of what had been done in the past. Those things may have worked really well. Like for us, it was newspaper ads were a really big thing. Well, when I came on board, social media was the new big thing. So hearing, well, why don't we just put something in the newspaper? That was really great back then, but now we're going to move forward with social media. So honoring what's been done in the past, but then also saying, here's the vision, and then here's how we need to move forward in order to grow the business.
Yeah.
Sure.
But what I love about what you're saying, though, is in order for a legacy to happen, you have to honor the past.
Yeah.
And then the past generation needs to trust in the vision of the next generation, right?
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
success doesn't happen until both of those come together. And it sounds like that's what you did really well. And you did it because you kept the ultimate goal in mind.
Right.
As you were having those hard conversations, did you have any support or were you leading those conversations on your own?
It was really Tracy and I, my husband, us together. And, you know, he had tried doing some things before we were married. And it's just hard when you're doing it by yourself and you want to do things. And so we really had each other to lean on and to be able to stay focused and to move the business forward and to move our vision forward.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing is whether it's a spouse or a business partner or a peer CEO, peer group or whatever, you need to have some sort of support to come alongside of you through that process.
Absolutely. I agree. Yes.
Awesome. Awesome. So talk to us about the sale, and then I want to hear more about what's next.
In 2022, we decided to bring our business to market. And we had really my first goal was I was hoping that we would be able to sell the store to a young family because we had been family owned and we thought, what a great legacy to pass it on. But as we looked at the landscape of our community and how it had grown and how we were even having a hard time kind of keeping up, we realized that selling it to a young family, number one, they probably wouldn't be able to afford the store at this point. And number two, it would crush them if they didn't have any hardware experience at all. And so we had to reevaluate. And that was a little bit of a grieving process for me to realize that we weren't going to be able to do that, sell it to somebody that way. But then we started looking at who would have a similar vision for us, because our number one goal was that it would stay a hardware store. And so we started looking for an organization that was big enough that could carry on the legacy of being a hardware store. And so then when we found that, we approached our buyers with a little teaser sheet, you know, here's what we've got going on. And a month later, we heard from them and they said, absolutely, we want to talk to you. And so we started that discussion with them. And then 10 months later, we signed our closing documents.
So the key in that I heard is that you really were clear on who it was you were wanting to go after and why.
Were there any memorable roadblocks that you remember throughout the journey? Downsides, pitfalls, hard times?
Going through the process of selling was really hard because we'd never sold a store before. And I brokered our deal. And so it was me between the buyer and our attorney and doing all of those things. And so you may not hear right away from them. It could be a few months that we might have heard. And so I would think that everything's falling apart, it's falling through. So now we're running a store. We're in the middle of selling, plus we're trying to plan for holidays and those kinds of things. And so it was very overwhelming at times as you're going through that process and you're wondering, are they going to back out? Is this going to go through? And so how are we going to handle this? If things fall through, and what would be the next steps? And so mentally, it was very mentally exhausting and mentally taxing to go through that process. I didn't, our buyers are very used to purchasing businesses. And so for them, they already knew on their end what they were going to do. They had already signed their letter of intent and they were moving forward. But I didn't know that. And so, having to just continue to trust to keep moving forward and not freak out. But mentally, honestly, that part was probably the hardest, was dealing with that.
Any little thing specifically that you maybe even had to do every day to make sure that you were ready to go into work so that your employees could look up to you, you know what I mean? And not feel like they're worried or whatever.
Right.
You kept on that leadership. What did you have to do every day, even mentally?
So November of that year was my hardest month. And I literally had to call a girlfriend every morning on my way to work and check in with her and do a mental health check because I was struggling. And so to keep my head in the game and to keep going and to keep being able to move forward, especially with the holidays coming, forward, and then being in the middle of the sale and having, the close date changing and stuff. I had to touch base with her every morning in order to say, I can do this. I can get through it. I can keep going. And it was really weird because the end of November, it was like something shifted and I could tell everything was going to be okay. It was all going to work out.
When you're in those times of, I don't know what to do, I think it is very important to make sure that you're good and being a leader. And I love how you mentioned yours was having that call every single morning. Deb, do you have any recommendations at all for other people to find whatever it is that they need to continue to move every day?
Well, for some people, it's actual physical movement, getting out and exercising. I still do that every day, go for a walk for at least 2 miles, just to keep myself moving. For others, it may be finding a therapist. There's nothing wrong with finding a therapist to help you talk through some things, especially if you're going through some hard mental challenges, or finding a trusted friend or advisor that can help you walk through it and just be that sounding board. Some people, it's being a part of a group. Maybe it's a mastermind group or something else, that women business networking or something where you're finding a group of trusted advisors. For me, when I feel like I'm going down the negative, what I call the negative path, knowing I need to reach out to somebody. And in the past, sometimes it has been a therapist. And then, like I said, this other time, it was a friend. And so just knowing yourself and knowing what you need to do for your own mental health and your own mental well-being, I think that is really key.
How amazing. I mean, you recognized that you were in that place and then you reached out for support. And then even on the days you didn't feel like it, you still had that touch point and it sounded like something broke. What do you think it was that broke at the end of the month that changed for you?
I think it was just knowing that I knew it was just going to happen. I knew that everything was coming into place, and I didn't need to worry anymore about how the dates were changing and things were kind of moving. And we were getting our negotiations kind of finalized and figured out. And so I just finally had a peace of mind that we were on the right path. It was going to happen. And I just needed to trust that and just keep moving forward. And so on February 1st of 2023, we signed our closing documents. And you guys, we gave them the keys and we walked away.
Wow.
We didn't need to do anything else. So my prayer was that they would feel that it was our gift. So we got everything ready as much as we could, and to be able to give it to them, or sell it, I should say. We didn't give it away, but to pass it on, and then for them to be able to make it even bigger and better and build upon what we did. And they've been able to do that. And our store is thriving to this day. And people have come up to us because obviously we're still in the community and thanked us for thinking of our community and keeping it a hardware store. And so the thing people don't realize is that when a hardware store closes, especially in a smaller community, most likely you will never get that back. And that ends up leaving a really big hole in a community. And so that's why it was our goal that it would stay a hardware store and that that legacy would continue on, not only for us as a family, but also for the community as a whole.
So then all of a sudden you're faced with another transformation for yourself, another identity shift.
Right? So I feel like we had some really good advice from some friends who had been through this transition, and they told us to take a year off and just take some time to process and grieve and think about all the things that you went through. And because my husband, this is all he'd ever known for 56 years. Our store had been in business. He was a month old when his parents moved to town and bought the hardware store.
Wow.
His college degrees were all around the business. So everything revolved around the business. And so they said, take a year off, take some time, process and grieve.
And how about you as a person? Was it hard to take a year to not so much re-identify, but focus back on you and what is your purpose and how can you continue to live that purpose?
I love that because it did take some time to process. One of the things I realized about myself is that I'm very driven and goal oriented. And so I tend to want to just quickly move on to the next thing. What I realized is that I never take time to celebrate my success. And so as I was kind of getting restless, I really felt like I needed to stop and look around and say, wow, look at how far you've come. Look at what you did and celebrate the success that we had and just enjoy it. Just enjoy it for a while and not feel like I have to get my hustle on and start hustling and start getting another business going right away and doing all the things, but just taking some time to rest and relaxed. We traveled, we did some things, and then we went on a cruise to celebrate the success of what we had been through. And so I think that tends to be for a lot of us in business is that we're always thinking of the next thing. We've got our hustle on and we never really take time to just stop and celebrate the success that we had and appreciate that and say, good job. Look at how far you've come.
Well, I love your story. If you were to look back on all of those years of preparation and then the sale and then the post sale, what were the top 2 or 3 takeaways that you had that you can leave our audience with?
I think number one is really listening to your customer and understanding first before moving forward with something is understanding their perspective. Having those hard conversations, not only with your family, but with your customers. So being willing to hear the hard things like you guys aren't very welcoming, your prices are too high, or your store is dated. Those are hard things to hear, but being willing to step into that only made our relationship with our community stronger because then we took their feedback and we were able to work on the things that we could work on. And that let them know that we cared enough to make changes that were inclusive to them. And then number 2, understanding where your family is at, especially if you're in a family-owned business or business partners or your employees, but understanding where people are at. What are their expectations? What are they thinking as it relates to the business? How are you honoring them and bringing them into the conversation as appropriate?
So what's next for you, Deborah?
So now we have our Everson's retail coaching and consulting. And we are working on helping other retail business owners through the process, and we're helping them become future ready businesses. So, one of my passions is to see hardware stores remain open. So, I talked about when a hardware store closes in a community, most likely they would never get it back. So, how do we help a hardware store owner go through the same process and be able to not only have a legacy for themselves, but carry on a legacy for the community? And so I know, Lori, when you and I talked previously, I had said that for a while I kind of wondered after we sold the store what my purpose was. And what I realized after going through all of this is I didn't lose my purpose. My purpose actually grew and expanded, because now we weren't just helping our customers at the store. Now we get to help other hardware store owners help their customers and continue their legacy and help their community.
Awesome. That's amazing.
That's
Thank you
terrific.
for your story, and thanks for joining us
kidding.
today. There's so many great nuggets, but I just think the biggest thing is, Deborah, how you really focused on figuring out your why, and you did that through listening to your customers, and then how you really thought about legacy by honoring the your past generation, but pushing forward with a future vision. And then the fact that you took the time to become prepared and understood when to reach out for support and when not to reach out to support, so that you weren't on an island. And so it's just really exciting to hear your story, and now to see that you're coming alongside of other business owners to help them not make some of the mistakes or have it be so hard as when you went through it, is amazing. So thank you for your
Cool.
time.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of Unstoppable. We hope it left you feeling inspired, ready to take that first step towards overcoming challenges, breaking free from what's holding you back, and make meaningful changes in your life. At VisionOne, we're passionate about helping leaders, organizations, and communities navigate critical changes, whether it's growing your business, preparing for an exit, embracing the next chapter, or guiding the transition to new leadership. Imagine a dedicated team working alongside you every step of the way, providing strategic planning, customized fractional HR services that are tailored to meet your unique needs. That's what VisionOne High Performance offers. If you're interested in learning more about how we can help you become truly unstoppable, let's connect through a peer group, a workshop, maybe even a retreat. Visit us at visiononeperformance.com and we'll start a conversation.